Good morning. I'd like to start today by announcing a very controversial position. I am a dog person. I like cats too, but in our family, dogs rule, sometimes literally. Rebecca, Molly, Jack, and I are proud to call Wexford O'Toole not only a loyal companion and best friend, but part of our family, and it's great for him to be with us today. And we're not alone. Many Canadian families like ours love their pets and enjoy their companionship. Over the course of the pandemic, many more Canadians opened up their homes to a pet. They brought comfort and smiles at a time of fear and too many tears. In fact, over half of Canadian homes now have a pet, and 90% of them see their pet as a family member. We sure do. Pendant la pandémie, beaucoup de Canadiens ont adopté un animal de compagnie. Plus de la moitié des foyers canadiens ont maintenant un animal de compagnie et 90% les considèrent comme un membre de la famille. C'est le cas pour ma famille. I would like to thank the humane societies and SPCAs across the country and their wonderful staff and volunteers who've been doing great work to care for abused and abandoned animals and to advocate for them. In 2019, they took in about 78,000 cats and about 28,000 dogs through their shelters. While the surge in pet ownership during the pandemic helped many of these animals find their forever homes, we also know it brought to light other issues. Due to demand, we saw a growth in puppy mills and illegal imports, criminal groups taking advantage of Canadians' love for their pets. And tragically, we've also seen an increase in animal abuse and violence, closely tied to the increase in domestic violence. It's time to protect the welfare of our pets and the people who love them. C'est le temps de protéger le bien-être de nos animaux de compagnie et des gens qui les aiment. A Conservative government will ban puppy mills, inhumane high-volume dog breeding facilities that churn out puppies for profit, ignoring the needs of the pups and their mothers. We will crack down on unethical breeders and dealers who mislead the public by claiming to offer rescue animals or pets bred humanely when that is not the case. Canada's Conservatives will ban imports of animals bred inhumanely and strengthen enforcement powers to seize animals when imported under poor welfare conditions. And we will put in place a long overdue national ban on cosmetic testing on animals. Un gouvernement conservateur va interdire l'importation d'animaux élevés avec cruauté. On va aussi renforcer le pouvoir de saisir les animaux quand ils sont importés dans de mauvaises conditions. Et on va interdire les tests cosmétiques sur les animaux. D'ailleurs, ça aurait dû être fait depuis très longtemps. When it comes to animal abuse, we know criminals who hurt animals don't stop with animals. There is an established link between cruelty to animals and violence towards humans. This link makes it critically important that cruelty towards animals be taken seriously by law enforcement and by all Canadians. Canada's Conservatives will add animal cruelty as an aggravating factor in domestic violence prosecutions to go after abusers who hurt their spouse by hurting their spouse's pet. And we will support pet owners fleeing violence by working with shelters to ensure that there are better options for women to leave abusive homes without having to abandon their pet. Un gouvernement conservateur va aussi ajouter la cruauté animale comme facteur aggravant dans les poursuites pour violence conjugale. Avec ça, on va pouvoir cibler les agresseurs qui blessent leur conjoint en blessant leur animal de compagnie. Et on va soutenir les propriétaires d'animaux de compagnie qui fuient la violence et qui travaillent avec les refuges. Et on va s'assurer que les femmes n'ont pas à abandonner leur animal quand elles fuient un conjoint violent. It's time to secure the future for Canadian families. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
We will now be taking questions. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions. First question.
Mr. O'Toole, Michael Couture with Global National. I wanted to ask you about Troy Myers, your former candidate for Dartmouth, Cole Harbour. What did you do to confirm the allegations before kicking him off your team?
We take any allegations of sexual misconduct or harassment very seriously. That's why this person is no longer a candidate for our party. We need to make sure that we have a slate of candidates that are here to serve the country and that we show support for victims and zero tolerance for folks facing allegations.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
Je prends les allégations d'inconduite sexuelle très au sérieux. C'est très important d'avoir une équipe professionnelle et ciblée sur le bien-être des Canadiens et la personne n'est pas un candidat pour notre parti.
So you take allegations extremely seriously, but I wanted to ask you about Cheryl Gallant. In 2 decades as an MP, she's made a series of statements that are not founded in fact. So why is she allowed to get away with it?
Our team is running on Canada's recovery plan, and every single person running as a Conservative candidate is committed to our 5-pillar plan to get the country back on its feet and get people working. It includes climate change and our commitment to meet our Paris reductions, get emissions down while getting the country back to work. And our caucus will be focused on Canada's recovery. Every single person.
Prochaine question, s'il vous plaît. Prochaine question, s'il vous plaît.
J'aimerais vous entendre en français là-dessus, d'abord.
Tous nos candidats et candidates vont appuyer notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada, incluant notre engagement dans la lutte contre le changement climatique. Tous nos candidats. Point final, c'est très important après la pandémie d'avoir un plan et une équipe totalement ciblée sur une relance économique et nos paliers dans le plan.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada. Comment les Québécois peuvent-ils vous faire confiance quand vous gardez dans vos rangs des candidats, plusieurs, qui ont exprimé des positions climato-sceptiques?
Nous sommes unis sur la lutte contre le changement climatique. Comme j'ai dit, tous nos candidats vont appuyer notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada.
Ils disent le contraire, vos candidats.
Incluant les engagements pour le changement climatique. C'est pourquoi, en avril, j'ai lancé notre plateforme sur le changement climatique. On doit atteindre nos objectifs tout en protégeant les emplois. Et tous mes candidats sont en accord avec notre plan. All of our team members are committed to our plan, Canada's recovery plan that includes a commitment to meet our Paris targets, get emissions down, while making sure the country gets back to work. That's what Canadians want, a team that has a plan for our future and that will be committed to it.
N'est-ce pas mal comprendre le Québec que de penser que des rétractations de quelques lignes de vos candidats seront suffisantes pour être crédibles sur l'enjeu du climat? Pensez-vous vraiment que les gens achètent ça, M. O'Toole, des rétractations de quelques lignes en 24 heures?
Comme j'ai dit, tous nos candidats sont en faveur de notre plan. Les changements climatiques est un enjeu important pour notre équipe et pour moi personnellement. C'est pourquoi en avril, on a lancé une plateforme sérieuse avec une prise sur le carbone d'atteindre nos objectifs. Malheureusement, M. Trudeau a manqué ses objectifs chaque année comme Premier ministre. C'était la même chose avec le déficit, c'était la même chose avec l'eau potable pour les Premières Nations. Les Canadiens méritent un plan et une équipe qui va livrer.
English.
Canadians deserve a team that has a plan and that will deliver on that plan. All of our candidates are committed to our plan to get the country back to work and to lower emissions and meet our Paris targets. That's why we launched our platform on the environment in April. It has a price on carbon. It has an aggressive approach to meet our targets while also helping the economy get back on its feet. And Mr. Trudeau has never made a climate target. He's never made a deficit target. He's never made a target on safe drinking water. Canadians are tired of a government that is always in scandal and never delivers. We will deliver.
Next question.
Andrew Lawton, True North. During your leadership race last year, you committed often to allowing free votes in caucus. You spoke numerous occasions about the importance of having a big tent party. Yet in your statement yesterday, you said if MPs and candidates don't get on board with the climate plan and every single aspect of your platform, they'll be booted from caucus. So specifically, sir, on which issues will you allow free votes, and on which issues will you demand a vote in favor of a particular proposal?
We are running on a plan, Canada's recovery plan, which the country needs to get back on its feet. On the first full day of the campaign, we launched our plan. All of our candidates are committed to the plan. It's exactly what the country needs. Jobs, accountability, mental health leadership, preparing ourselves for the next pandemic, and a commitment to getting the budget balanced over the next decade. Everyone will be focused on that plan and a positive campaign. Tous nos candidats sont ciblés sur notre plan et on a 5 piliers, les emplois, une loi anticorruption, leadership sur la santé mentale, un plan d'être plus prêt dans le futur pour une pandémie et un plan d'équilibrer le budget. Ça serait primordial pour notre équipe et les Canadiens méritent une équipe qui va livrer sur leurs promesses.
If you'd like to take a stab at the free vote aspect of that question, I would appreciate it. But my follow-up, your platform commits to recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and relocating Canada's embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. When the United States did this, it was widely condemned by the United Nations General Assembly, the European Union, almost all of the United Nations Security Council. If you're a new prime minister on the world stage, are you prepared to handle that backlash and onslaught in making such a decision?
Yes. This was a commitment I made several years ago. Israel is a close ally of Canada, a friend, a democracy in a place of the world that needs more democracy, and we will move our embassy and respect the capital being established in Jerusalem. And that does not preclude us from committing to a two-state solution and making sure that we support the development of capacity in Ramallah and other places. But we will show leadership. It's important for Canada to once again emerge on the world stage as a country that will stand by our values, that will be a defender of human rights, and will commit to a strong, principle-based foreign policy.
Next question.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. It's Kate Bellingaro from Bloomberg. You're promising a lot of new spending and are reaching out to organized labor with more union-friendly policies than any of your predecessors. How is that sitting with the Conservative base?
Our party, like all Canadians, wants to get the country working again. They want to see the pipelines built in Western Canada. They want to make sure we get a deal on softwood lumber. They're tired of Mr. Trudeau failing on steel and aluminum tariffs. And I want to partner with anyone that wants to get the country back to work. So I am reaching out to union leaders, to members of unions across the country, because Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Singh, they don't support those jobs getting back on track. They support an economic recovery for some parts of the country. All Canadians deserve a recovery, and I'm looking to partner with private sector trade unions to kickstart an economic recovery in all parts of the country. Je suis prêt de travailler en étroite collaboration avec les syndicats, les travailleurs. C'est important, après la pandémie, d'avoir une relance économique dans chaque secteur de notre économie et dans toute la région. Je suis en train d'établir les relations avec les syndicats pour le bien-être de leurs membres. Et les autres partis, M. Trudeau et M. Singh, sont contre les emplois dans le secteur énergétique, forestier et les autres. Je vais défendre nos travailleurs et nos intérêts chez nous et sur la scène internationale.
And we've talked a lot about telecoms over the last few days and your plans to increase competition in the market. I'm wondering, what would you allow a U.S. company like Verizon to buy a big Canadian telecom such as TELUS?
We want to see prices come down for Canadians. There is a cost of living crisis, and whether it's grocery costs going up 5%, whether it's cell phone and internet bills, we want to see downward pressure, and that means more competition. We are open to allowing American investment in Canada's competitive landscape, but we also have to have the proviso that we have access to compete in that industry in the United States as well. We also have to tackle Buy American, the rising of softwood lumber tariffs. Mr. Trudeau has allowed our U.S. relations to completely erode, and our economy depends on strong trade access. So we want to see reciprocal trade access, free and fair trade, and that will include in segments like telecommunications.
Next question.
Mr. O'Toole, good morning. Omar Sechedina from CTV News. Animal welfare is certainly a worthy cause, but so is the welfare of millions of racialized Canadians. And yet, in your platform, the word puppy appears more often than the word racism or systemic racism, of which there is no mention. What does that say about your priorities?
Well, throughout my year as leader, Omar, I've been reaching out to all Canadians. In fact, my first speech, I said I wanted more Canadians, regardless of their color, their background, their religion, their sexual orientation, to join our mission to get the country back on track and unite people. I've spoken out on the horrific rise of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism against people of color, Indigenous Canadians. My first question in the House of Commons was on reconciliation. And I will fight for Canadians who have not had fair treatment, who face inequalities in their daily life. We need to make sure that they have an economic recovery as well. And so you'll see in our plan, we want to see solidarity in communities, which is why I'm reaching out and why I'm very proud that we have the most diverse slate of candidates running for the Conservative Party because they believe in Canada's recovery plan and they're going to help us tackle racism, reconciliation, inequalities. Those are key elements of what we need to do to heal this country.
I'm still failing to see how you will tackle an issue you can't even name in your platform, but I will move on. Another word that does not appear in the platform is the word Islamophobia. And after the London attack just a couple of months ago, you stood before thousands of people and said you were committed to urgent action. 2 months later, you have only adopted one of the National Council of Canadian Muslims' 40 recommendations. How is that action urgent?
Well, we're going to be working with the National Council, with other organizations, with faith leaders, mosques across the country to make sure we tackle Islamophobia. That's why I went to London to be part of that important cross-party dialogue. I'm very proud that we have here in Southern Ontario, not far from where we are now, two prominent members of the Muslim communities in their communities in Whitby and Milton running for us. Very proud that a lifelong friend of mine chairing our national campaign as a prominent Muslim Canadian business leader. I want all Canadians to be part of the Conservative Party and part of our mission to recover our economy, tackle mental health and other challenges, and tackle Islamophobia and the alarming rise in hate and intolerance that we've seen through the pandemic.
Next question.
Janice McGregor, CBC News. I'm trying to understand your strategy in saying, as you did last night, that the emissions cut that your party, if it forms government, would work towards is 30%, despite the fact that earlier this summer, Canadians submitted targets of 40 to 45% to the UN. Why has your party effectively decided to pull out of the club that its allies are in, heading towards the Glasgow conference this fall? And what consequences are you anticipating for reneging on this and bailing on our allies?
I think Canada should meet its commitments, whether for Paris, NATO, or other commitments we make. We have to have a plan to get there. Mr. Trudeau says nice things and then doesn't deliver. He hasn't made his objectives, and for him to just make up new targets without a plan, or with just, I guess, quadrupling the carbon tax again, that's not a real plan. And it's why we went out in April, after months of consultation, to deliver a plan to meet our commitment, and then we can work on ambition past that. But we have to get the country working again. We have to get our emissions down, and Canadians deserve a real plan, not just more hollow and empty words, or not the Liberal and NDP approach of just shutting down whole sectors of our economy. That's not what's going to build back our country in terms of the healthcare system, long-term care. We need a strong economy to make sure we tackle climate change. I invite Canadians to check Canada's recovery plan. It's our commitment to finally start delivering. Les Canadiens et les Canadiennes méritent un plan réel sur le changement climatique. M. Trudeau a manqué ses objectifs chaque année. Il a dit des belles paroles, mais toujours sans un plan. En avril, j'ai lancé notre plan pour le changement climatique. On doit atteindre nos objectifs, premièrement, et après ça, travailler avec nos alliés sur le futur. Ça serait notre approche, une relance économique, un engagement clair sur le changement climatique et un plan pour notre avenir. Les Canadiens méritent un plan.
I heard you mouthing some words about trade priorities a few minutes ago. But the fact is, if you're still talking about a 30% cut, that ship has sailed. The rest of the world is being a lot more ambitious right now. And our key allies, the EU, the US, are now talking about carbon border adjustment mechanisms, other ways of sanctioning trading partners that don't meet their ambition when it comes to emissions cuts. So why do the Conservatives think it's a good idea to put other sectors, other jobs at risk in sticking to a 30% target when the rest of the world has moved on?
Well, first, I'm glad you mentioned carbon border adjustment tariffs. They're in our climate change plan. I want to make sure that countries like China don't game the system, as they have been. The aluminum produced in Canada, in Saguenay, Quebec, and Kitimat, BC, is on average 7 times less carbon intense than aluminum from China. So why did Mr. Trudeau not stand up for those sectors in the NAFTA negotiations? I want us to make sure we meet our commitments. Other countries are a little tardy on their commitments as well, but I want to show Canadian leadership with a real plan that will get the economy moving and meet our objectives. It's why, for transparency, I put it out for Canadians in April. It was a real commitment to make sure that we have more than just the hollow words of Mr. Trudeau. We have a commitment to make our emission reduction targets, but also get the country back to work.
Next question, please. Next question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. Do you commit to getting Canada to net zero emissions by 2050?
I want to see a made in Canada solution for net zero by 2050, yes. And I've spoken to industry, both large and small, about the programs they already have underway to try and attain those objectives. It's also why in our detailed climate change plan, we have support for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. We have support for small modular reactors. There are a lot of ways that we can really tackle emission reductions to meet a net zero by 2050 goal and actually export those solutions, those technologies to other countries, thereby generating more jobs in the process. That's a key part of Canada's recovery plan and a key part of getting people back to work.
So if you do want to see Canada get to net zero by 2050, why do you support the Northern Gateway pipeline or building another pipeline project when the International Energy Agency says for countries to actually reach that goal, no more pipeline or coal projects can be approved?
Well, the thing I liked the most about the proposal for Northern Gateway was the economic partnerships for Indigenous communities. Indigenous communities were going to have 33% ownership. I would like to see intergenerational transfer of wealth and opportunity after generations of trauma transfer. Mr. Trudeau canceled that pipeline without consulting the Indigenous owners. He failed in his duty to consult. That's not the way we have economic reconciliation. And we have to recognize that Canadian energy is environmentally and socially leaders in comparison with other energy producers. So over time, as we see a lower carbon future, we should make sure that democratic countries use Canadian resources, not resources from Saudi Arabia or Venezuela or Russia. That will be our approach, and getting access to tidewater and supporting economic reconciliation is part of that. On doit travailler sur la réconciliation économique avec les Premières Nations. Et les Premières Nations étaient les investisseurs dans l'oléoduc Northern Gateway. C'était un projet important pour les Premières Nations et M. Trudeau a annulé sans consultation avec les Premières Nations. C'est inacceptable. Et nos ressources naturelles sont meilleures que les autres, comme l'Arabie saoudite, la Russie et les autres. Et on doit avoir les opportunités avec Northern Gateway et Trans Mountain pour les familles dans l'Ouest, dans les secteurs énergétiques.
This will be the last question. Ce sera la dernière question.
Good morning, Mr. O'Toole. Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Yesterday, you said that you would not approve a pipeline through Quebec. The Northern Gateway pipeline is deeply unpopular in BC. Why would you force through a pipeline in BC that is unwanted, but you won't do the same in Quebec?
I've said in the case of Northern Gateway, the real innovation in terms of the Indigenous partnership, the Indigenous equity ownership in that pipeline, was really a model that I think our country has to adopt in terms of benefit agreement for Indigenous communities. That's why I was a big supporter of that pipeline and why I was really upset when Mr. Trudeau canceled it without consulting the Indigenous communities who were part of that project. What we have to do is get Trans Mountain built and try and make sure that we get access for our resources, which are leaders in environmental and social governance, to make sure that we have a strong sector to power and economic recovery in Canada. On doit avoir une relance économique dans toutes les régions de notre pays. C'est pourquoi j'appuie les oléoducs, gazioducs dans l'Ouest comme Trans Mountain et Northern Gateway. C'était un projet important pour les Premières Nations là-bas et nos ressources sont meilleures que les autres à travers le monde.
Indigenous communities are not a monolith, and there was a lot of opposition to the pipeline among First Nations and Indigenous groups in BC. So how would you get them on board, and how, again, do you explain it to people who live on the coast in BC who are deeply concerned about Northern Gateway, about the tanker traffic that it brings, and about the potential environmental impact of that?
Well, in Canada's recovery plan, we have a major section on partnerships with Indigenous communities. I'd like to see more partnerships, more equity stakes, more revenue sharing models so that there's jobs and opportunities for First Nations across the country. Energy, softwood lumber, mining and minerals are great examples where we can actually have Indigenous partnerships. I've met with economic development organizations. I've met with former Indigenous chiefs that were part of the Northern Gateway project. I've worked with Steel River and other companies that are Indigenous-led. I want to see Indigenous supply chain initiatives in public procurement. I want to make sure that there's an economic recovery for all families following COVID-19. All families, including Indigenous peoples and First Nations, and that is in Canada's recovery plan.
It will be all for today. Ce sera tout pour aujourd'hui. Merci.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.